When is 3 out of 4 not good enough? When it takes 4 quarters of basketball to win a game. The Brooklyn Nets fall to the Memphis Grizzlies. That doesn't mean that it wasn't entertaining, exciting, irritating at moments. And we're going to break down the high-level superstar battle that took place there in Memphis, as well as some frustrating coaching, lack of awareness, and a Ben Simmons narrative that does seem to be rearing its ugly head once again. All coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo. Yes, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie, owner-operator of DFSR, for all your daily fantasy sports rankings from DraftKings to FanDuel. He's got you covered. I'm Adam Marmot, breaking down the New York Football Giants 6-1 over on the One Giant podcast with my boy Andy Mack. We thank you for making us your first listen today, free on all those great platforms, and let you know today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your jobs for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. And Doug, the Brooklyn Nets fell, as we said, in Memphis, in what was ultimately, I think, an entertaining game. There's always going to be things we take away from it. But as we discussed coming in at a high level, superstar talents in the NBA going toe-to-toe. That's what you want to see on a night in, night out basis.
Yeah, I mean, 130. If you're looking for scoring, this was it, 134 to 124. You had the superstars in this game all pretty much balled out. Ja dropped 38. KD dropped 37. Kyrie Irving dropped 37. Desmond Bane, who we desperately wanted to draft 2 years ago, dropped 38.
Correct.
And that was kind of the story, was in terms of just like those 4 great players. And if you want to put Bane as a great player, I don't think most people would put him there, but for tonight he was. I mean, but he's really, really good. But yeah, for tonight, you just got basically these guys just duking it out. And it was a super chippy game. There was a lot of physicality. There was a million fouls. There was technical fouls. There was weird coaching decisions by Nash, sort of not knowing the rules, which we'll get to. I mean, it was a bunch of stuff. But in the end, it's a disappointing loss. The Nets felt like they were crawling back into it and couldn't really get over the hump. And I mean, we'll talk about it all, but you know, if it's a superstar league and these are the superstars, like they put it all out there, they put on a show, and just, you know, the Nets just couldn't get it done.
Yeah, it's early enough in the season for me where it's not time for overreactions to wins or losses, right? We're trying to look for those positives, obviously. But you mentioned it, superstar talent going toe-to-toe. That's great. And also, like, I'll just say, as we've talked about before, I'm a fan of the NBA overall, and there's something really exciting about watching Ja Morant do his thing. And the Memphis Grizzlies team, like, surprise, I don't want to spoil this for anybody, they're really well constructed to support a player like that. You know, he has the Kyrie-esque kind of in the air fluidity to his game. He's incredibly undersized. He looks like a wafer floating in the breeze out there half the time. And also, he's obviously incredibly effective at what he's doing. And then you surround him with Desmond Bane, and you surround him with Steven Adams, and you surround him with guys that are going to play chippy, that are going to be edgy, that are going to be physical. Going back to last year, they talk. They want to talk. They want to get in your ear a little bit. And I respect it a little bit. There's an element of like throwback kind of NBA to a lot of the supporting cast for the Grizzlies that you go, okay. And by the way, as we used to always say when the Nets were at the height of their powers in the Kevin Durant, James Harden, Kyrie Irving iteration of the team, you get everyone's best shot. Ja Morant wants to come out and put on the show against Kyrie and Kevin Durant. Everybody does. So that's something you should anticipate night in, night out. This was a really good game. Again, as I said at the top, if you just ignore the fact that the Nets forgot the first 7-ish minutes of the third quarter kind of matter.
Yeah, like if Kyrie is more like, you know, sort of like an artist around the rim, I would say like Ja's like more like a sledgehammer, right? Like they go about the game slightly different. They're super dynamic guards, and they just go about their game a little bit differently. Ja hit a bunch of threes tonight. When he's hitting threes, you're really, really in trouble against this team. And I mean, when he had the throwdown on the alley-oop, it looked like he was going to jump clear over the backboard. He's super fun to watch. Like if you're not a Nets fan, like you got to tune into Grizzlies games on the regular, because like they're just a very, very fun team to watch. They play like this all last year. They punched above their weight all season, getting, as far as the conference semifinals in the West last year against Golden State, gave them everything too. It's just a super, super fun team to watch. If you like basketball, this was a pretty fun game to watch, even with all the chippiness. Again, like it sucks. The Nets lost, and we have a bunch of takeaways from the game. But like you said, if you're just looking to watch, good basketball, or at least, two teams that go about it two different ways. Like these are teams that are constructed differently. They go about their games very different. There's a physicality to and it's probably, like you said, an edge and a chippiness to Memphis that the Nets like emulated a little bit, but they just don't have the same attitude as this team. And that's fine. Like not every team needs to have the same kind of attitude on a night to night basis. And that's what makes it like fun to watch. It makes these two teams, when they meet stylistically, fun. It's not a chess match, because that would imply sort of like, like lots of moves around the table. This was just kind of, a rock, paper, scissors match where everyone's just kind of throwing different things.
Throwing rocks.
Yeah. Well, one team's throwing rocks, another one's kind of throwing paper, but everything beats another thing. And the way the Memphis played tonight just beat the Nets.
Yeah, and you go and you look at the Nets, Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, both throw down 37 points in this game. And to your point, like we always talk about Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, it's always going to be this kind of beautiful style to their game. But throughout the first half of this one, it really all the greatest hits were getting played, right? Like Kyrie Irving was getting into his bag. I thought Kevin Durant, you always watch, maybe it's me, like as the narrative is becoming, well, is Kevin Durant getting a little bit older, and what is his game going to look like? And then he's taking body bumps and just elevating off of 1 foot, and dropping fadeaway buckets for and ones. And you just keep getting reminded, it's funny. We're talking about a physical edge that Memphis plays with. I think that Kyrie and Kevin Durant play with like a mental edge to their game, where they feel like at every turn and pass, they are being so massively disrespected that the only way to respond to it is in those moments. And you see, like Kevin Durant has the snarl on his face when he feels like, you're going to foul me? Like that's your game. Your game is going to be to foul me. And then he goes and knocks him down at the line. And it did create a very interesting dynamic. Again, through the first half, there was a back and forth there, and the Nets led this one at the break, by the way. And I think that they responded really well to the physicality. It was just a matter of, are you going to be able to come out of the break and still maintain that?
Yeah, and they really weren't. And we'll get into that in a second. Yeah. And they weren't able to. They really weren't able to sustain it. I thought overall the game that they played was actually mostly fine. I mean, they allowed some sort of dagger threes at times where they had defensive miscues. I think the offense did stagnate at times to sort of like an alarming degree. There were stretches where it looked bad. We're going to get into Simmons for sure. We're going to talk about Simmons. We're going to talk about Claxton too. I thought overall, I mean, they still put up 124 points. You're not going to lose a lot of games that you put up 124. The problem is defensively, they just continue to just sort of be a sieve at times. And, you're also never going to really win that many games when the other team puts up 134. Yeah. And so that's just kind of, sometimes that's just the story. The baskets that Memphis got were at times a little too easy. Again, they just hit, they had some trouble switching, and they too many Bane 3-pointers and just sort of end the shot clock stuff. So I think just in general, this is a team, the Nets, I think they have real flaws. We're starting to see what those flaws are. There are going to be teams that are going to give them more problems than others. Teams like this that have some size underneath, that have super dynamic playmakers, the Nets might be under-equipped to deal with some of that, right? Even with what I thought was a decent game from Claxton. And I think we're going to see, as the course of the season goes on, this is a good proxy for certain teams. I can see all season giving the Nets issues, right? New Orleans was a big physical team. The Nets really struggled with it. This was not the same kind of physicality, but the Memphis is a physical team. The Nets struggled with it, right? Toronto is a long team that doesn't have super dynamic playmakers. The Nets beat them, right? I think we're kind of in for a season, at least with this current personnel, that might just go like this. Yeah. We're going to probably be able to predict the teams that are going to give them real problems.
And it was funny too, because just I'll add on to that as we close out this portion of, and then start to focus in on some of the other role players and guys that had good games and things we take away, and then areas of frustration for sure. The other thing about Ja Morant and then the way that they're built around him, I think that when we talk about the Nets being a longer team this year with Ben Simmons, obviously, and Claxton playing better, and it just everyone down the line, Royce O'Neal is still a more physical player, even it gives you more functional length on the court. I find it interesting to watch for then the next matchups that we see. Dynamic playmaker in the mold of backcourt guy, Ja Morant, that can be dynamic with the ball in his hands. That's also an area that we're going to have to watch for here, because we know the Brooklyn Nets don't have a lot of guys to throw at that matchup, especially when other things can be occupied in and around it, right? When you have enough, when you have a Bane, when you have a Brooks, like there's enough things to respect here for Memphis outside of the biggest problem that it makes it really hard to hone in on that. And that's why we end up seeing 134 points. Listen, I believe in the defensive end of this floor. However, I think that we've seen these glimpses, and then also times when the communication, the continuity isn't there. So there's going to be lumps like this. Again, I know no fan wants to hear me say this. I just kind of really enjoyed the game. I prefer if the Nets had won, but it was a really fun game. There was 6 minutes in the third quarter I didn't appreciate. Everything else, Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, Ja Morant, like it was great. Like, this is why I like watching the NBA. So that's what I'm taking away from game number 3 of the season.
All right, we'll get into some more stuff here. Like I said, we're going to talk about Simmons. We'll talk about some of the mismatch problems that they had. We'll talk about Nash, too, some of the things Nash did, some of the things he did not so well in this game. Really appreciate everyone that's jumped into YouTube. Obviously, we're seeing all your comments. We are going to make sure that we stay on after the regular podcast portion to take some questions in YouTube and kind of riff a little bit longer. So make sure you stick around all the way to the end of when we get to the formal podcast. In the meantime, I've got to tell you about our friends over at LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. Look, I know what it's like to hire people out there. It can be a real dice roll. You just sometimes do not know who you're getting. You can figure it out all with LinkedIn Jobs. It helps you find the right people for your team faster, and here's the best part, totally for free. You add your job and you put the purple hashtag hiring frame into your LinkedIn profile. That's going to spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools. They're going to give you the screening questions that make it easy for you to focus candidates with just the right skills and experience. So you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. You don't have to waste time on people that just aren't qualified. That's what LinkedIn Jobs is helping you with. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering high-quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
And what I like to apply is a little bit of critical thinking. Listen, I alluded to it a couple of times, and we wanted to stay at the highest level there to start the game and the stars, because it was entertaining. That being said, coming out of that first half, I thought one of the things that took the toll, and this is why we kept referencing the physicality, it seemed like, okay, the Brooklyn Nets were able to still execute their offensive scheme and do what they wanted to do. Defense was going to be a battle. That's okay. It's chippy, as you mentioned. But then they come out in the third quarter where I thought they're leading at the break. My anticipation is, hey, more of the same, guys. Let's keep that flow going. Let's try to get that transition game going. I think we're only scratching the surface of how good they can be in transition. And then they come out and they stagnate and they get into iso ball and nobody's moving and no one is providing outlets. And on the one hand, I can point to the physicality of Memphis and say, yes, they're doing a good job. On the other side, you still scored 124 points. So at some point here, it's like you just got away from what fundamentally was working for you. Did that, I'm just going to say, that irritate you? Because it bothered the heck out of me to start the third quarter that way, where I thought there was a real opportunity for some of that beautiful basketball from Kevin Durant and Kyrie to say, hey, come chase us. We're up. We can make this a double-digit game in our favor here. And instead, it just all kind of fell down around them there. They only scored 5 points over the first 5.5 minutes of the third quarter.
Yeah, it's where they lost the game. They lost the game at the beginning. They won every quarter. They won the first quarter, the second quarter, and the fourth quarter. They lost the first 7 minutes of the third quarter, and that was the whole game. Like, they were winning coming out of the tunnel, and they just couldn't. They just sleptwalked through those first minutes. It looked so bad. Memphis was up and down the court. They were just like feeling it. Like they let the crowd all the way back in it. They let Memphis all the way back in it mentally, physically, and with just on the basketball court.
Yeah.
And it was just terrible to watch. It was like you just saw the whole game slip away. Frankly, I try to be as positive as possible with this stuff. And I mean, we do the podcast no matter what, but I was like, this is just the kind of thing that is so hard to come back from. You were winning and you came out and slept walk through a really critical 7 minutes, or I mean, it was like 6.5 minutes ish, right around that time in the third quarter. And you just did all the things that you couldn't do. Like I said, that's a great crowd. Like Memphis has a great crowd. The Grindhouse, it's awesome. Like you can't let them back in it. Like this is a super well-coached team that executes what they want to do really well. If you just let them do that, it's just going to build. They're going to be able to build on that so much confidence-wise. And the Nets it was just terrible. Again, they lost that game in those 7 minutes for sure. Again, they won every other quarter. Like go ahead.
No. And I was going to say the brutal part about it is too, because you think about these slumps have bigger ramifications when you don't score points like that. The Nets scored 28 points in the third quarter.
Yeah, because they came back in the last 5 minutes of the third quarter
and really put on a bit of a show, right? Yeah, put on a bit of a show just to get themselves back in and go into the fourth. They gave up 45 points in the third quarter, and that's like more than the sluggish offensive start. That's I think in real time I'm realizing that's actually what really bothers me. Is okay. You get a little stagnated. There's some clunkiness. We've seen it. We know you're trying to integrate new pieces. Joe Harris still working back. No Seth Curry. All that stuff. Okay, fine. But defensively, you got the length. Like you have the pieces to be disruptive, or I believe you do. And cut two, man. I mean, 45 points. 45 points, that's a half sometimes, in some NBA games. To give up that much when you're struggling on the offensive end, I'd like to see as the season progresses that, hey, when things do start to get a little bit rough on the offensive end, hang your hat defensively, because we've already seen in preseason and early this year, when they do things well defensively, it breeds success offensively. We know they want to get on the break. We know they want to play fast. That comes off of defensive energy, getting those quick rebounds on missed shots and getting out in transition. So it's only 6 minutes out of 48, but by God, did they piss me off.
Sometimes that's just enough though, right? Like sometimes that's just enough to do you in. And the Nets had other issues here too, from just a technical, well, besides the technicals, from a technical standpoint, like they were in constant foul trouble. They kept having to move guys in and out of the lineup because they just couldn't stop fouling. Claxton had foul trouble. Obviously Simmons, who we'll talk about soon here, he fouled out. A bunch of other guys got up to 3 fouls. And so they were fouling all over the place. I mean, it was physical. Were some of the fouls chippy? Yeah, for sure. Did I think like this is the best ref job of all time? No, it was not. There was definitely some calls here that were of the question mark variety, I thought, or in a physical game, like it began to seem like every single thing was getting called. And I think mostly it was called both ways, because I think Memphis had some gripes too. But there was definitely some critical fouls on Simmons specifically that do make you scratch your head. I don't think Simmons did himself any favors on any of these either. But this also just disrupted, I think, what the Nets were trying to do also. Like they kept having to just make substitutions around foul trouble, like in times where they just simply didn't want to. And that wasn't the whole story of the third quarter, but it was a story of other parts of the game. And like I said, when it came down to just doing in a game against Memphis, the Memphis is a really good team, right? Mm-hmm. Even without JJJ, like Jaren Jackson Jr., even without him,
the Trey J,
like this is a Triple J. This is a really, really good team. If you're going to make a bunch of mistakes, like you're not going to win a lot of times against teams like this. Like that's just that. It's sometimes as simple as that. If you're going to lose the mistakes game, then you are probably just going to lose. Like the margins are super, super thin in the NBA when you're at this level of team. It's just not, there's just not enough. Most teams are trying out there. You just can't have huge mental lapses like for long stretches of the game. And when you do, you're probably just going to lose. And I think that's what the Nets did here. And, there was other stuff here with Nash. I think some of these are of the minor variety, but they're also concerning. Like, do you want to just bring up the Nash thing and we'll talk about Simmons here at the end? Like, what do you,
let me just, the last thing I'm going to say is on that. And then we'll get into Nash and we'll get into Ben Simmons. And we'll even speak just again, I'm going to speak highly of Nicholas Claxton because he is still having a great game and a great start to his season. Just on the referee point that you brought up, it went both ways, and there's nothing worse than watching a really exciting game of basketball and going, I wonder what they're calling here. What do you think that is? A couple of guys getting teed up here. And by the way, like, and it was I think it was Desmond Bane. Was it Desmond Bane? It might have been Brooks and Kevin Durant that went like nose to nose, eye to eye, and just kind of mirrored each other around the court for a while. But I like that. And I'm fine giving out the text to settle things down in that regard. It's sometimes you just want the game flow to kind of dictate the way you call the game. And usually players will understand, hey, as long as it's going both ways, I'm okay for things to continue to get more physical here. I don't know if it would have panned out for the Brooklyn Nets ultimately, but it was frustrating that at certain times it just felt like, man, are you choking the rhythm out of this game by interjecting yourself there consistently? So that's my 2 cents on that, but we can close out here on Steve Nash.
Let me just hit this Nash thing. Let me just hit this Nash thing real quick. We'll take a quick break and then we'll be back. So because I want to talk Simmons for the last bit of this piece.
Oh, this guy, Doug's got some thoughts.
Yeah. So there's a critical piece here where Nash just didn't know the rules. Like the Memphis, there's a running clock up to the 2 minute, up until the last 2 minutes of the game, which means after a make, the clock is running, but the shot clock does not start until the player touches the ball. Yep. This is why you saw Ja Morant walking the ball up the court, not touching it, something you usually do when you're trying to save time at the end of games because you don't want the clock to start. That is correct, under 2 minutes. Before that, with the running clock, if you go back and watch, and I think they made mention of it during the broadcast, he ran like 27 seconds off the clock. He did this multiple times, but the most egregious one was where he ran 27 seconds off the clock before the 24-second clock even started. You saw Nash getting confused because he didn't know what was happening. Simmons was confused also and ended up there were Ja picks for the ball. Finally, Simmons doesn't know what's going on and he fouls Ja. Was it a ticky-tack foul? Yes. Simmons at that point has 5 fouls though. And so this is like sort of a borderline egregious error by Nash to not know that this is happening. And it's, again, something that good teams like Memphis will use to their advantage. And they ran a ton of time off the clock. They ran a full possession off the clock. Just on that one instance, they did it other times, after
10 seconds for 15 seconds.
Yes, they ran multiple possessions for the Nets because that's the Nets need the time, not Memphis. Like they ran multiple possessions off the clock and there was no counter to it. It's an egregious error by Nash to not go and just have someone pressure the ball, to have him at least pick him up. And anyway, we'll get into Simmons here in a second.
Yeah. So my last just quick thought on that too is like, yes. And by the way, because it starts at the top and it works its way down. Steve Nash is the head coach. You got to be informing your players. Also, every head coach and every player seemed to understand what was happening on the Memphis side of things. Didn't seem like any Brooklyn Nets player had any awareness of what was occurring. That's Ben Simmons is the guy on the point of attack there defensively. But guess what? Anyone else could run after that ball at any point to disrupt what's happening, understanding, hey, we're losing time on the clock here. Instead, just to your point, Steve Nash is he's confused. He's complaining to the refs. Why is the clock running? They're casually mentioning that's the way the game goes. And all of a sudden, like you could probably make the case, almost up to nearly a minute over the course of possessions that the Memphis Grizzlies were able to take down there from about the 4.5 minute mark down to the 2 minute mark. They were able to bleed clock off of here. And that's when it was a 6 and 7 point game, effectively a 2 possession at times game. The Nets lost a lot of opportunities there. We can leave it at that because the tail end of it is Ben Simmons getting up on Ja Morant and taking that foul. You said it. Ticky-tack, good for you. However, the lack of, and this is what it was frustrating because now we're going multiple games here. Ben Simmons' aggressiveness and the way that he can impact a game defensively is unquestionable. And also, what is questionable is his judgment in certain situations of, I've got 5 fouls. How you get up in Ja's grill there is a little bit confounding to me. I'll even back it out a little bit more because I don't know. You could tell me your take on this. Ticky-tack, maybe, but now there's multiple games where Ben Simmons is getting called on those moving screen fouls on the offensive end with consistency. And that to me is you need to be making that adjustment because now we're talking about 1, 2, 3, 5 instances over the last 2 games. And that's really where you're coming up against it, having 5 fouls late. It's these little instances throughout the game and then an ugly one at the end that gets you fouled out.
I mean, let's just say what it is. It's been bad. I across the board. The mental piece of it is not there with these fouls. Again, that was a terrible foul. Like the one that he got on the baseline on Bane was probably not totally a foul too, but it just still seems like lack of situational awareness. Like you are in foul trouble. It's just you have to take probably one step back with the aggression. I don't know. Like, again, just do I think that he's getting overcalled a little bit? But again, he's not doing himself any favors in this territory.
But get overcalled. Guess what? Get overcalled and pissed off about it, and also adjust to it, right? Because you're not going to get any. Again, I'm not forever annoyed by this, but you're not going to curry any favor with me if your response to getting called with something consistently is always just being frustrated by it and not acknowledging, hey, that's the way it is. I need to make the adjustment now.
All right, and from a basketball standpoint, it just hasn't clicked. It's been bad. I don't really. And I know they're 1-2. They won the game against Toronto. And he's got 83 minutes on the court for the Nets so far. They're a minus 45 in 83 minutes. Minus 45 in his 83 minutes. He was like the one minus in the Toronto game. Everyone, like, they lost the minutes that he was on, even in the game they won. They got brutalized tonight. He was a minus 16. Again, is plus minus the ultimate arbiter of figuring out if you're good or not? No, but if you use it comparatively, it starts to become that way, right? Like, you can start to look at, if there's big differences, and we're going to see with play-by-play stats and more off-court stuff as their sample size grows, what this is really looking like. But that's just a number. Like, minus 45 in 83 minutes is terrible. He's had 1 million fouls. Like, he's got 14 fouls. So the other little things, he has 14 fouls through 3 games. He has 2 blocks and 1 steal. Like, if these are going to be the numbers, like, the Nets cannot win. That's very simple. If your fouls are going to triple up or quadruple up what you're doing on the defensive end, you're always going to get probably more fouls if you're super aggressive, but it's not like those fouls are turning into other stuff either, right? Like, it's not like the super aggressive play is turning into blocks and steals and you're just getting called on. Like, those aren't happening at all. And he's just getting called with tons of fouls. Not to mention just like some of the offensive issues that they're having that other teams are slowly figuring out too, like playing double drop coverage. I think the Nets will be able to take advantage of this stuff as time goes on. And I think that that's not going to be the end of the world, but we might be in for a whole season of this. I mean, how many times do you just want to say, hey, you have a matchup here, go to the rim, rim. Like, you got to take it. You have to make the opponent at least believe that you're going to try it. Like, it doesn't have to always turn out great, and it doesn't have to look beautiful, but they have to think that at least sometimes it's going to happen. When you don't do that, when you don't try to turn the corner on any defender almost at all, even in the situations where you probably should try, when you play hot potato out of the dunker spot because you just want to get rid of the ball, even though you're 6'11", and you probably should turn around for like a little baby hook or something, but it's like someone just passed you a time bomb with 2 seconds left on it, and if you don't want to make sure you're not holding it, like, these are real issues. The Nets have gotten absolutely murdered in his minutes. And I'm pro Simmons. I want him to be good. I'm not trying to just drag him here. These are just the numbers. Like, this is just what's happening here.
Okay. So here's what I'm going to give you, which is probably a silver lining in a negative way. Kevin Durant right now, he is a minus 41 on the season.
It's not that he's not that high, is he? I looked at this. He
was a minus 23 in the game against the Pelicans to open up the season. He was a minus, I think, 10 tonight, and then a minus 8 in the win over Toronto as well. So that, we can make that statement of, hey, now chicken or the egg here a little bit, what maybe is causing some of the negative lines for other players. Now, maybe the best way
here's where the real test of this is going to come. And I'm glad you bring this up because you're right. Like, that number is bad. Where we're going to probably be able to filter it out, and I don't think this is going to be up here this quick, is we just got to start looking at where
Simmons minutes.
Yes.
Yep.
Like it's like Simmons non-Durant, Durant non-Simmons. We're going to know it. Like, we'll know it pretty quickly. And by the way,
here's another one for you. Nicholas Claxton, minus 8 over the first 3 games of the season. So if you think about from twofold, one, probably times when these guys are getting off the floor from one another. Now, we know they have overlap as well, but also just in terms of skill set, right? Nicholas Claxton is a guy that gets out and runs the floor. He's not a shooter. He's not, a great ball handler. Like, okay, like, he's limited in where his value lies. Now, he can benefit off of Ben Simmons, obviously, but to me, the question that I think this starts to ask then is, what is the best role for Ben Simmons on this team? We've been talking about coming into this season, and maybe it ultimately gets there. Well, Ben Simmons with the ball in his hands and facilitating the offense and everything. Okay, maybe. But maybe the reality is he needs to be playing at the 5. Maybe that's where he needs to be. And someone else needs to have their ball in their hands. And that means now putting Nicholas Claxton potentially, if not out of the starting rotation, right into the second unit where he can be aggressive or whatever. Or I have no issue with, and this is, I'm not trying to be reactionary about it. Ben Simmons has been away from the game for a long time. I don't have a problem figuring out how do we maximize the value of Nicholas Claxton early days and get Ben Simmons up to speed here in whatever form or fashion that takes. Because right now he's a net massive, as you pointed out, negative on the team. And it's just, listen, you get 10 games in and you're 2-8 or 3-7. That has weight on the season overall. So Nash and this coaching staff is going to need to start to navigate this.
Yeah, and it's a good point by you that like the Durant numbers aren't too far behind. And look, you can be at the whim of one good 7 minutes of basketball here. Like the Kyrie Claxton run that they went on in Toronto, in just when that's a quarter of your seat, not that much.
But Durant's minus 23 in one game alone, so that's a big weight.
Yeah. When 1/12 of your season, they went on a run where those other two guys weren't on the court, which is what happened in Toronto. It's going to buoy the numbers. So look, all this stuff, you need sample size. I guess with Simmons, the numbers don't help, and it's not passing the eye test.
Because the difference with Kevin Durant is it's passing the eye test, right? Like, yes, all these other guys are passing the eye test. It's just a matter of finding your rhythm. Not only do you have these negative numbers to back it up, but the eye test on Ben Simmons is a guy that just seems out of whack. And as we highlighted, guys like Zion Williamson, players coming back from injuries and long absences, do not seem to be struggling in the same way that Ben is right now.
Yeah, like with Durant, you're like, okay, he was minus 10. He also dropped 37, went 14 for 20 from the field, 8 of 9 from the line. Like, there's other things you can at least point to. With Simmons, you struggle to really point to any of the high level numbers. I think it's looked good for stretches, but in the aggregate, it isn't there yet. And so it's a work in progress. This game 3, I get it. But I'm just saying this just is what it is at this point. Okay, we're going to close this out. As a reminder for everyone still on YouTube, hang out, throw your questions out there. If you want to put Locked On Nets, sometimes it's a little more helpful for us to see it. If you have questions or comments, we'll try to throw some of those up here on the screen as well for all you that are either checking out YouTube for the first time or over on the podcast. Make sure you like and subscribe wherever you listen to the podcast. Like and subscribe over on YouTube as well. Really appreciate all of the great stuff that we've gotten back from everybody out there. We'll be live after every single game. That's the best way to help the show.
Not really a quote so much here, but a reminder. A fan had reached out in the comments one day and said, hey, you should do a quote from, and he mentioned someone. I forgot. I blacked out and I can't remember. But if you want, give me your musicians, your artists, your celebrities. Tell me who you want to hear a quote from. I'll go track them down, shout them out, and you at the end of the episodes. That is from a great American poet named me, Doug.
Oh, one of the all-time great poets. We've been quoting one of the all-time great poets here since the day one of the podcast, and we're not going to stop. Now, we'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Surprise, it's still us. We're back. Bonus content on YouTube. As Doug said, if you use the Locked On Nets, just so we can kind of see those questions jump at us in the comments. One thing that we can use, and sorry, the comments have been fast and furious. If you were in here at the start, I think it was Matt. I'll mention you by name at least. He had the question coming in, though, that was, is Nicholas Claxton the third best player on the Brooklyn Nets? Go ahead, Doug. Take it away.
Is Claxton? He was good tonight.
He's been good every night, man. Yeah, I love his game.
He was just really good. I know people are always going to look at like, what Steven Adams was doing. Claxton held up really well on switches. I mean, Adams is a physical force. He had 13 rebounds, and Adams is good too. But I thought Claxton was just fine. He played a really good game. He played in foul trouble for a little bit of it. But I thought for what he's trying to do, he held up mostly pretty well. He played 33 minutes. The minutes were pretty much even, like -2. I think he's been very good. The Daron Sharp thing, was something of an adventure for sure. I thought at times it flashed okay, and at times it looked, just comically bad. But I fail to find like a ton of problems with Claxton. Yes, he's always going to struggle a little bit with guys that are slightly bigger bodies than him, but it's not to like some hugely alarming degree to me. And I think what he does well kind of like makes up for it. Like, he can guard the perimeter still pretty well. I thought tried some stuff with Ja. I thought actually some of the problems that they had with Ja were more of just the primary attack defender. Like Simmons just wasn't aggressive with him enough. And then they just eventually had to move Simmons off because Simmons was in foul trouble, and the Kyrie thing and Royce O'Neal was just not going to ever really hold up that well. So think those are Claxton issues. I don't know. What was the question? Is he the third best player?
No, I don't know if I don't think he meant it in jest. It was like, is Claxton the third best player
He might
on this
be
team right now? I think he is, right? Like he's just and again, being the third best or wherever on the category, that's purely just based on like, are you serving your role to the best level of effectiveness that you can? And I think that Claxton has. He's been reliable and he's been consistent. And oh, by the way, little birdie whispered this in my ear, and by little birdie I mean myself. Nicholas Claxton knocked down 3 of his last 5 free throws at the end of last game. And in this game, he was 2 of 2 from the line. That makes him 5 of his last 7 at the line. I mentioned this over on social, 63% the last month of the season last year. I think that he had, as you pointed out, just the all-time historic worst case of the yips at the line in the playoffs. But I don't think he's nearly as much of a liability as we've been labeling that, which does shift a little bit the way you think about him, especially in late game sequences and his value on the court.
Yeah, like I said, I'm pro Claxton. We've been pro Claxton. I think that yes, is it like a perfect...
there he is. There you go.
Yeah, Matt. I saw him. He's been, I think, a plus on the court. Again, there's going to be things that he doesn't do well. You're going to find this with every center. Like every center, you're going to run into problems with what they can and can't do well. This is why very few centers close huge games, right? Because like unless you are the most elite at either offense, like Jokic, or Embiid, and defense, like Embiid is too, or if you're like defensively, like Robert Williams, Time Lord, like he's so good that they can close with him on the court because he's just such a great center, right? Mm-hmm. Kind of all the other ones, like they just kind of have problems. There are other guys that you can do it, like Ayton can close. I'm trying to think who else here. Like I'm just talking about like, Gobert, we'll see. I mean, they ran into problems with him. My point is that unlike superstars at almost every other position, and Claxton is not a superstar, but like the problems are magnified with centers, and almost all of them have some kind of huge hole in their game that when you get down to real brass tacks, it's going to be exposed. Yeah, that's just how it is for all of them. Like we all lived the Andre Drummond experience. Like we just know that this is the case. There are very few guys that you can have. Now, you want to say it would be nice to have like another big body to go in and deal with these guys sometimes in a physicality. I'm still going to try to think that Sharp can get there, but like I don't think any of this stuff is Claxton's issue. Like I don't think he's done anything to really warrant getting dragged at all by fans. I think he's been really, really good.
And that's probably the thing too, when a lot of fans bring up, you need to, you got to go out, get this big, you got to get a certain player. I think sometimes it diminishes the value of the guys that you have, as opposed to what is the functionality on the court. And again, we mentioned in the show, I think what happens here with Ben Simmons, this is something we're not probably going to talk about on an episode to episode basis. 2 things I thought about here as we keep an eye on the comments in case anyone has a question they want to throw in. What do we got here? Why don't you respond to my Twitter DMs? Well, I'm sorry, Matt. Are you in the DMs? We'll respond for sure. Sometimes we just miss them. No, well, listen, we responded to you here. We like you, Matt.
I'm inundated with Twitter DMs. I can't.
Can't sometimes I don't know which ones are up. The 2 things I was thinking about was just we don't do a lot of looking forward on the schedule here, so there's a handful of games as far as getting this initial sample size. I'll just run just really quickly. They're going to be at Milwaukee, and then they're going to be home for 4 straight games. Dallas, back-to-back nights against the Indiana Pacers, actually with the day off in between there, Saturday and Monday, and then the Chicago Bulls. So give me these next 5 games, and there's some clunkers in there like the Pacers. There's some competitive teams in there, and I think we'll start to round it out. Like we talked about ahead of the season. Listen, give me the 15 to 20 game sample size, and I'll start to get some concrete thoughts about the team. I will say the concrete thoughts on Ben Simmons are getting harder faster than I thought they would. Like this stuff is, the mix was off, and this thing is solidifying maybe a little bit sooner than I anticipated, although there's a long way to go.
I got one to throw up here. So this one, love watching from Australia with Mills and Simmons. Do you think the team needs more Aussies? Which I thought was good, but I do want to bring up Patty Mills tonight had a pretty funny game because I thought like at certain times, he hit a couple big threes. He was so funny about him because he hit a couple big threes. He hit the backboard twice, and he was an absolute traffic cone for Tyus Jones. Like at one point in the second quarter, where Tyus Jones might as well have dribbled up the ball over half court and screamed, "I'm going to dribble right by you now," and then did it. Like because he did it like 5 straight possessions or something like that, where he either got all the way to the rim or pulled up in the mid-range and hit shots, and it was just all Patty Mills. And I think that's actually why you saw Edmund Sumner come in and play a little bit, because they were like, well, this isn't working. We just need to have another defender out there. So anyway, I saw Patty Mills, so I wanted to make mention of this. I think that's going to continue to be part of the Patty Mills experience.
And by the way, I was going to say, like, we always know he's going to be a liability on the defensive end of the floor. He's always going to get called down the switches. That's not his total detriment, but the offense, like you said, it's a spectrum, baby. And Patty is going to give you that entire thing. I had one other thought too. I wanted to get to here. Let me just hit a couple of these here though. We got Connor up. If Ben continues to be unengaged on offense, how do they navigate that? Just stick them out there in the dunker spot and split minutes. Like that's not an unreasonable, like that's kind of the point I was making earlier about functionality. If we think that, well, he's going to be the trigger man and a facilitator, that's one thing. If he's going to be stagnating the ball and picking up his dribble or just making things clunky, then at a certain point, you want to maximize what Claxton's doing well right now and figure out how do we also maximize Ben Simmons. And offensively, maybe it just makes sense, at least in the short term. Big picture, you want him to be what we want him. We got to bet on this guy to be the leader of the assists in the league this year, which is already totally dumpstered.
Great.
But in the short term, maybe just get the ball out of his hands and let him just be a functioning piece of the offense rather than the motor of it. That seems to be causing a lot of issues at times for this team early in the season here.
Yeah, although the assist numbers per minute aren't terrible for him. He's got 21 assists and he hasn't played, a ton of minutes. Like on a per minute basis, you'd think that maybe he can get there. It's just like it has looked pretty good. It looked pretty bad. Mm-hmm. With him, the whole key to him is just going to be, I don't think you need to stick him in the dunker spot. I mean, you're going to do if he's not going to do anything, but he has to try. Like I said at the beginning of the show, he has to try to just get to the rim. He's that's
what it is, right? Just be aggressive.
A few times he has tried. Like he has tried to do it. He's tried going up there and he'll throw the little baby hook. He'll try to throw the little runner in there, but it just doesn't happen nearly enough. He's huge. He's a 6'11" point guard. And he's not Giannis by any stretch of the imagination. But one thing that makes Giannis such a force, and it doesn't matter that Giannis can't shoot threes, and it doesn't matter that Giannis isn't even that, or at times hasn't been great at the foul line, is that his whole goal is to try to bulldoze you and try to get to the rim. Yeah. Now, Simmons is not, again, he's not Giannis, but he has to try. Like he has to, one out of every 3 possessions when you get a smaller guy and you got to try to turn the corner on these guys, and draw in the defense and make them at least think that you're going to try. Like there's massive amounts of disrespect with some of this drop coverage that they're playing with him, where and you can see it because this is sometimes when it looks like we call it, like, looks like it's stagnating. When he moves side to side, when he does a side to side action and he's looking for a DHO, and there's no defender even worried that he's going to do anything. Like his body's sideways to the basket. He's not looking to try to turn and move toward the basket at all. He's looking to kind of bring into a dribble handoff and set a screen. And I think mostly that is like a good play to run. But there has to be a threat that he's going to do something different. There's no threat. Like there's no worry by some of these defenses that he's going to do anything in those spots. And there's times when he squares up a defender. Yes. Is he going to take a 3? Of course not, except for that one that he took at the end of the third quarter of the half or whenever. Yeah. No, he's not going to take a 3. But one thing that he was really good, especially early in his career when he was with Philly, was when you would back off of him, he actually got ahead of steam
downhill.
And that was actually a real problem for defenders. Like he would get ahead of steam going to the basket. And that actually did cause defensive issues because it made the defender start to backpedal and they were risk of fouling him and he would try to get past them and he would try to finish at the rim. So like giving him space, all that did was allow him sort of a runway to start ramping up to the basket. He just doesn't do that anymore though.
And by the way, and maybe this is, again, maybe this can be the start of something. He was 3 of 5 at the line tonight. So, maybe confidence at the line can then inspire him to get more downhill and say, what's the reward? What's the worst case scenario here? I don't get to the cup. I get fouled hard. I have to go to the line. If you can knock down some of your shots, then I think there is a mental aspect to that, right? Why do I want to stay away from driving the paint, getting fouled? Because I don't have confidence that I'm actually going to be able to knock down these looks. Hopefully that maybe gets them there across the line a little bit. I want to make a point here in a second on Joe Harris in this game as well. But first, why do you think that the Nets struggle to start the third regularly. This would be the big component of, to me, it's always, you mentioned it wasn't necessarily chess, but an aggressive game of checkers or Connect Four at the very least tonight. Memphis comes out with an aggressive mentality. Things are falling for them offensively. They are frustrating the Nets on the defensive end, and there isn't necessarily the adjustment. Now, the Nets don't have a healthy Seth Curry right now. Joe Harris is still working his way back, and I want to get to him. So you have limited options. Nash tried to go to Yuta a little bit early in this game. You try to find ways to mix and match things a little bit. But ultimately, why are they sluggish to start the third? Because coaches make adjustments at halftime, and maybe the Nets are not necessarily counteracting that or coming out with their own tweak. Sometimes it's really easy to rest on your own success in the first half. You won the first half. So let's see if they can respond and do something different. They do, and you don't have the counterpunch to that. And again, I think a lot of this does end up getting rolled up into what's going on with Ben Simmons and how that can kind of end up creating a real bit of chaos on the offensive end. The other thing quickly here, and throw up another question if you see one there, Doug. The other thing, though, I just saw this coming through the comments when we were doing the full episode before, talking about Joe Harris and his problems, et cetera, et cetera. Still working his way back, obviously. 3 of 9 from the field, just 2 of 7 from beyond the arc. You can paint this picture however you want. He's plus 12. He's the only guy that was in the positive on the entire team for this game. That means that he's on the court when good things are happening. Doesn't mean that he's the only good thing that's happening on the court. But what I will find interesting when it comes to him is that in this new system of the offense, he's going to have to do a couple of different things. And he did it a couple of times tonight. Drove across the lane, got a couple shots up, laid off a pass, set someone else up. He's going to have to offer a little bit of that before he can step himself back out to the outside and start knocking down those looks. He started 0 of 3, knocked down 2 out of his final 4 perimeter shots. So the rhythm is starting to come there for him. I think it's going to be really easy to dog him or dog Seth Curry when he first gets back out there. Guys like this, feet, injuries, 3-point shots, it's going to take a little bit of time to get there.
Yeah, the first couple ones were all coming up short too. Like they were all front.
The legs
rimming.
aren't there.
Yeah, but then he hit a couple. He hit one with a guy in his face. He hit one off a rhythm 3. I'm not worried really about him coming back and just to kind of full strength. They're going to really need his shooting just for the rest of the season. They're still, I think, not taking enough 3-pointers, and they're just not hitting them at enough of a frequency. 31% again tonight. I know they took 29. I think some of them were of like the late game where they were trying to play catch up. They're not taking as many rhythm, I don't think, looks as they should get. Maybe Curry will help a little bit with that. But just in general, I still think they should be taking more 3-pointers. I don't think it is funny. Actually, it is one of those ones where like, how did Joe Harris piece together a plus 12 in this game? Like it makes you really kind of scratch
none
your
of
head
your GD business.
He just grabbed everyone. He just grabbed everyone's plus minutes. Like he just happened to be on the court because it is one of those ones that really stands out.
What's it? The beta fish, right? Just going around, just sucking off that shark, just having little
It's
nibbles.
so funny when you look at everything else. It's like, how did you even do that? It's really pretty hard to do.
And a big part of it is too, and it's like, and I'm not knocking Royce O'Neal because he's been good, and they both shot 2 of 7 from beyond the arc. But people have talked about like, it's like, well, what's the difference? You want to have Royce in the starting lineup, and you can stick with him in the starting lineup. I don't have any qualms about that. But there's a difference between a guy that can shoot the 3 versus the guy that is the specialist at shooting the 3. And as this offense finds that rhythm, I think we'll see that. And that's a big part of how Ben Simmons and the offense overall, but even Royce O'Neal, he's good at setting up people as well. So how these guys interact with Joe Harris and with Seth Curry when he gets out there, that's going to matter to their success as well. What do we have up here? 6'11", and people saying defensive player of the year type of guy and nothing. Yeah, I don't know. Whatever. I don't really worry about that. Sorry.
Let's do one. We can do one more and then we get out of here.
Who do you see taking the number 3 scoring spot? Matt, we don't like you in DMs, but we love you in the bonus YouTube. Claxton this season cannot be Claxton if we want to be a contender. See, again, I'm going to fundamentally just disagree with this idea. Like, Claxton's not a problem for me right now.
I think he's saying who's going to be the 3rd leading scorer. I think
sorry. What do you think? Curry?
Well, I mean, it should be Simmons, but it's just not going to be. So
I know, we're past him now, obviously.
Yeah, probably Curry or Harris. But again, if it's not Simmons, I will say that like this is the problem, right?
Can it be Claxton? Be scoring double digits.
It's going to be. They're going to have problems though. It can be. Yeah. I mean, it could be anybody. Like it could be Edmund Sumner and he scores 5 points a game. It can be anybody. I'm just saying that like if Claxton's the third leading scorer, that means something else has gone wrong. They just need to get more out of Simmons. That's it. It's kind of just that simple. I don't think it's like a super simple fix, but I think that sometimes like it's Occam's razor. It's like the simplest or the most obvious solution is usually the correct one. Like he just needs to be way better.
And one thing that we can close out on just as a exercise in frustration. Ben Simmons is the other guy in the Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, Ben Simmons triumvirate. I do wonder, right? We all know what happened leading up to this season. He's the problem right now. We would all agree on that. So what happens over the next 5, 7, 10 games is going to be kind of important to the way Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant look at this team and their expectations. And maybe if we think that there is these clear lines of communication now between Sean Marks and ownership and how this team can be successful, like you'll start to hear those rumblings about, is Ben Simmons going to be the guy that fits in here with us? The issue is going to be, if he's not fitting in with you two, where do you think he's going? How do you think something's going to change there? So that's why it needs to work with Ben. It's why you need to find a way to get him into his rhythm.
Yeah, I'm worried, buddy. I'm a little worried from that standpoint.
By the way, just to be clear, Doug and I exchanged text messages not but 36 hours ago talking about how what's the most important. Like, listen, there's always positives to take from games. It's a long season. A lot of things are going to work out. And then you see a couple of games like this and you go, I got to tell you, if I'm being fully honest, though, I think
we were plenty positive. I think there's like some things just like it's hard to find tons of positivity in it. It's just the reality of the situation.
You can't look past what's happening with Ben. Right now.
We're not over here being like the Nets aren't going to make the playoffs. This team's dead. Like, there's a lot of other takes you can have after you get, if you start 1-2 and you get, let other teams. There's way worse, Chicken Little kind of takes that you could have. I don't think we're having any of those, but pointing out the obvious flaws, I think is obvious. All right. Thanks for everyone for jumping into YouTube. Yeah, hoping to have Chris Mahalan from That's Daily on tomorrow. So take keep an eye out for that. And then two more games left this week. So
busy.
We'll be very busy. We'll be after you on Wednesday and Thursday. I'm screwing this all up at the end. Okay. Thanks for everyone on YouTube. Appreciate it. We'll be back again tomorrow. Like we said before, talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Doug did a great job.